All right, let's get started. I wanted to introduce myself. Pardon me. I was originally the co-founder of Ambient Insight, which has a well-established brand in the learning technology research industry. And because of all this will become obvious as we go along the slides here. I decided to rebrand as Metaari, a new company, because of all the exciting things that are happening now, and I'll talk a lot about that in this presentation. The industry is undergoing profound changes right now, and I decided that I needed a new brand to cover that. That was my introduction. This is the agenda, and this will become immediately clear. And the reason I'm speeding up in the beginning is because I'll slow down as we get going. Metaari is a Latin word for measurement, is what analysts do. And what we do is we identify revenue opportunities for, in this case for Metaari, for advanced learning technology suppliers. And my new company focuses on, pardon me, let me get a cup of coffee here, on advanced learning technologies, including psychometrics, game mechanics, obviously, with this presentation. But we're also looking at robotics and cognitive computing, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and augmented reality, and we'll discuss all of those in relation to games today. Here are the key findings from the report. The market conditions for mobile education games, pardon me, I'll get the tickle out in a second, in the US consumer segment is quite robust at 24.3%. The revenues will spike to over 800 million by 2022, and at this rate of growth, it'll be over $1 billion by 2024. Now, until a year ago, I was telling developers that China was a great place to compete in. Now I'm telling developers, and I'll be very blunt about this, is stay away from China. China passed these draconian, what I call draconian regulation in last year on the mobile gaming industry in general, but it drastically impacted the educational game industry as well. But you know, I didn't list them here. I listed them in the report, but there's a litany, if you will, a list of regulations that you have to pass. You have to pay to get your game approved, or at least looked at, and then it can take months, and you don't know whether you're going to get approved or not. So no developer in China can actually afford that, except for the very large brands. So that's the end of my preaching today, which essentially leaves the US and India as the only viable consumer markets for educational games. Our sources of data, have always been very transparent about where I get my data. So the data in this report is coming from 2 reports in this presentation, and each report includes a detailed description of data sources. So both of these reports are distributed exclusively by the Serious Play Conference, and I'll present on the global game-based learning market at the conference in July. And Sue, I didn't put a date on here because I know sometimes you change the day and the time. So, but I will be there, folks. And what I do, is not rocket science per se. It takes a lot of time. For all of you developers out there, a really good source of statistical ranking of bestsellers of educational games in general, but educational games. The App Annie is the site that has a category for education. I will warn you that you don't want to go to educational games as a category, because all you'll get is early childhood learning stuff. So you go to the education category and you can search by country and by operating system, mobile operating system. And it'll give you a good idea, and I'll give you an example here soon of what kind of data you can get. I will tell you that the data changes almost daily, and so we do monthly snapshots on over 122 countries. Now, our foundation of our research is our learning technology research, Taxonomy. And we've developed this over the last 15 years. And basically, we watch 7 international regions. We break the buying behavior down into 6 buying segments. And then we track 8 types of digital learning products. What we've added, this has changed over the last 15 years. The most recent addition is on the far right, is robotic tutors, and I will give you an example of that as we go through this. The full description of the taxonomy is posted on our website, and the link is there at the bottom. The important thing I want to stress today is that on your left, you see the legacy learning technology products, and on your right, you see the next generation learning technology products. And it's going to become abundantly clear in the next couple of minutes why this is important. This is why it's important, because the growth rates for legacy products are in decline now. This is pretty much the reason I decided to start this new company, new brand. We had a very well-established brand with the Ambient Insight, and people said, why wouldn't you just, maintain that brand? Because the world has changed, and I hope I can prove that to you. But the legacy products, the last report I wrote for Ambient Insight was on the e-learning industry, the global e-learning industry, which has a decline rate of over 6%. Now you think, what's the big deal? Well, there's so much money there that we'll lose, that industry will lose over $20 billion in the next 5 years. So I got a lot of criticism for that report, but I didn't sell it. It's still available on the Ambient Insight site, and it's free. But suppliers don't like to pay for bad news. So I gave that report away. On the other hand, if you look at the growth rates of the next generation products, it's extraordinary. And we'll talk about all of these. Now, I often read that there's no framework for game-based learning. And that always annoys me, because there are frameworks out there. And we have developed this one about 4 years ago. When we first developed it, there was only 6 types of game-based learning products. If you look at this chart per se, this wheel, 4 of these are absolutely brand new. The assessment and evaluation educational games are primarily in the corporate segment. Very brand new. We won't discuss them today because we're talking about consumer market, and they're making really good money. Augmented reality has been on the market for a couple of years, and they're doing well. Virtual reality is brand new, and the artificial reality educational games, they will start coming out this year, and I'll give you some examples of the companies that are doing that. By the way, in the taxonomy document that I mentioned, these are explained in much more detail. So here's the growth rates in the US consumer market for these types of mobile educational games. Don't get too, the high growth rates, if you look at location-based learning and augmented reality on the far right, high growth rates at that extent usually mean they're new, brand new. So they're going from a relatively low revenue baseline. But nevertheless, within the 4 forecast period, the revenues will be substantial. All right. It's kind of, you know, I'm kind of embarrassed that I used the word game changer in this, but we're on the cusp now of extraordinary innovation in the learning knowledge transfer business. In educational psychology, there are two phases of what's known as learning. There's the knowledge transfer, where the data is communicated to the user or to the student, if you will. And then there's learning transfer, where the student can demonstrate mastery. With these new cognitive computing platforms, particularly IBM's Watson, we finally got to the what we have always called the Holy Grail. I've been doing education and training and certification for over 25 years. And the Holy Grail has always been personalized learning. Despite what suppliers have said to date, that they have so-called adaptive personalized learning, we've never actually obtained that until now. And so IBM has an education division, and they're basically pushing hard to get the cognitive computing, the artificial intelligence engine into the education industry. Sesame Street is building games for kids. IBM launched their own build of Minecraft, which teaches children about diseases, infectious diseases. And then just recently, this month, a company that develops game-based learning for disaster preparedness, you know, floods, etc., that for children, they reporting their product to Watson. These aren't on the market yet, but they're coming fast. Pearson, Apple, Blackboard, Harcourt, they're all building products on IBM Watson. All right. Here's an example of what I mentioned about the robots. This is a hybrid. It's not only a robotic tutor, but it's also built on IBM's Watson. This is an extraordinary product. Sometimes diminished somewhat, they call it a smart toy, but I highly recommend that you go look at the demos of this. The excitement in the kids when they're using this really simple interface. But the darn thing, this tiny little thing, is actually linked to Watson, and it actually adapts to the individual child. And so it learns and adapts to what the child's cognitive abilities, the kind of questions they're asking, and it learns very quickly to adapt to the individual child. Unbelievable. All right, we're going to talk about the primary market catalyst now. And I will discuss each one of these. So this wheel is simply a graph to show you what they are. This is where I'll probably bog down. So sometimes I get excited, as you can tell, about these things, and I'll try to keep moving. All right. Brain trainers. There are oh God, apologize. I will not answer it. Nintendo basically invented the category of brain trainers in 2005, and they took off. They took off in Japan, they took off in America, they took off. At one time, brain trainers were the #1 best-selling. Brain Age was the #1 best-selling game in the UK over every other game, including console games. So it took off big time. Then it started to wane and dwindle, the demand for it, because it was only on the Nintendo platform. But it was revitalized in 2014 when a range of suppliers started releasing them for smartphones. Now, we've entered, this is good news and it's bad news for people who are looking at developing brain trainers. In 2015 and 2016, we saw a wave of advanced innovation in brain trainers. These next generation products, they incorporate something called cognitive behavior therapy, but also a range of neuroscience and cognitive science. Unbelievable. The good news is these are very advanced and they can command a high price point. The bad news is they require a high degree of I guess you will, talent or expertise. It's almost impossible for a game developer to come up with these on their own. They have to partner with people that are experts in the neurosciences. Now, there are two types of these next generation games. In general, those products designed to improve the functions, cognitive functions of relatively healthy people, you know, whatever that means. But there are brain trainers, but a new type of product right now that's coming to mobile is mental training apps for athletes. Now, until very recently, mental training for athletes was always delivered on in physical sites, in classrooms or at the sports team. Now these developers, the legacy developers or the legacy producers of mental training for athletes are porting their products to mobile formats, but also there's a whole new set of startups that are developing these. Now, the demographics are huge. It's estimated there are 40 million people in the United States that participate in organized sports in any given year. And then there's the mindfulness apps which are big in the consumer market, but they're also big now being used in corporate. But these are basically attention, stress based. Many of them actually are based on yoga and meditation, but not all of them. And then the bottom blue charts. These are amazing products, and we'll talk about one of them at least, the products for children with special needs. These are all highly specialized, very demanding as far as the expertise needed to develop them. Now, the mobile games, serious games for children with special needs, are gaining traction. They're coming on the market at a relatively rapid rate. They're developed in partnerships between game developers and cognitive and developmental specialists, and they command very high price points usually. App Annie, the site I told you about, has 600 apps for special needs children. And then Common Sense Media, I don't know if you've heard of them, but they actually are a broker, if you will, they basically, I don't know the precise word, but they basically evaluate apps and games for children, and then they use experts in the field to do this. And they have over 100 apps that they basically recommending these apps. And I'm still trying to find the word what this is actually called. But they're doing really well. And as you can see, I want to give you a couple examples of the price points. But remember, these things are difficult to build. The one I want to point out in particular is an extraordinarily new product from Sidekicks. Now, the graphic is on the far right. This is an extraordinary product. I've never seen anything like it. I highly recommend you look at the demo of this. Basically, the therapist and the parents can speak through voice over IP, and their words are delivered by these virtual avatars to the child on the autistic spectrum. So basically, the child is interacting with a virtual avatar, but the audio is being delivered by a real human. Now, I say here that there are 3 virtual avatars. You'll notice there are actually 4 characters on the right. Fizbit is actually the child's personal, if you will, playmate. Fizbit is AI, artificially intelligent. Fizbit actually learns the child's preferences for media, their interaction with the app, and Fizbit comes into action when the parents and the adults aren't around. So Fizbit actually is an artificial tutor, if you will, and it'll suggest, because it learns what movies the child likes, and it'll suggest activities when the parents and the adults aren't around. Incredible. All right, here's an example of, and I agree, broker's not the right word. There's a word where people actually they vet. It's probably a better word, and I don't have the precise word right now. They vet. Curator, thank you. They curate. Oh my God. Oh, okay. Now I can go on. Cleared my mind. Yeah, they curate content, and they're relatively well respected from what I can gather. Now, the growth rate for early childhood learning games is quite robust at 33%, 33.1, and the revenues were more than quadruple. In today's market, right now, brain trainers are the top revenue generating mobile education game in the United States, in the consumer segment, for sure. By 2022, mobile early childhood learning educational games, which is kind of redundant, early childhood learning games will be the top revenue generating game type in the US. And you look at the stats here, this comes from App Annie, snapshot we took in January. You'll see the dominance of these particular types of games. A couple patterns here that stand out. If you look at Amazon and early childhood games, and then there's no language learning games or cognitive or brain trainer games, it's because they are so dominated by early childhood learning games on Amazon that there's no room. They basically have taken the air out of the room. Now, with Microsoft's platform, lots of language learning games, only one brain trainer. That's because developers have not spent a lot of time, if any, and this is only the top 20. So there may be down there, but developers have not focused on developing brain trainers for the Microsoft platform. But they're really gung-ho on developing language learning platforms for the products for the Microsoft platform. Basically, these are the 3 top in the consumer market. It's much different in the government and in the corporate market. All right, this is what we call the content trench. This has been remarkably consistent over the last, I'd say, 10 years. The vast majority of content, of mobile content in general, for pre-K through grade 2 in the United States is game-based. So that's, I guess, the good news for the market. The bad news, if you will, is there are tons and tons of titles. And the biggest problem you have if you're developing early childhood learning games is the problem which is called findability. There are so many. And I will caution you as well that people crank these out, developers crank these out, and parents, children as well. The parents quickly can tell if the game is valid or if the game has any true educational validity. So pretty much the market takes care of itself. It's called the long tail, and very, very few of poorly developed games make any money. On the other hand, we'll look at some of these. By the way, the content trench goes up for the older adults on the far right, that's because of brain trainers. For the most part, until recently at least, brain trainers have been developed for the older demographics. A brand new trend right now is brain trainers are being developed for people of all ages, but particularly for very young children. And that just skews the far left bar a little higher. Now, I can only speculate, which I don't like to do as an analyst, but the reason I think the numbers are so low in the middle grades is because the schools are the buyers, not the parents. For the young children, the parents buy products for their children. For the older adults, consumers buy their own products. In the 30 to 50 years old, I'm not quite sure why that's so low, but basically this is an analysis of all the operating systems of the top selling products in all the app stores. And this is what's selling right now. In other words, there might be a market for the middle grades, but they're not getting developers. I think developers are not targeting that because they believe it's the schools are buying it, not the parents. All right. Again, kind of a good news, bad news scenario. The top bullet has the major brands, and we all know brand sells. So I once had a developer, and actually this has been about 5 or 6 years ago. One of these brands told me that nobody's making money off of mobile. Well, that's not true anymore. The major brands do quite well. There's a second tier, and I'm not diminishing them by any means. There's a second tier of kind of best of breeds that are doing well as well. And those include DuckDuckMoose, which was acquired by Khan for $1 last year. And I think I talk about it one more time, but basically a nonprofit philanthropist funded DuckDuck for 3 years. So DuckDuck sold their products until they were acquired by Khan, and they've been given a 3-year free. They don't have to make money for 3 years. So we'll see what happens in 3 years. But this philanthropist sunk millions into supporting the development of new DuckDuck games, which Khan provides for free now. Play Kids is based on, it's a Brazilian company. They consistently rank in the top. And then Dragon Box is a Scandinavian company. They sell really well. And again, all of these have some astonishing. Now, the reason I bring up Amplify Games in particular is I don't know if you all recall, but News Corp started a company called Amplify, which is going to change the world. And then Amplify was not successful. And so News Corp started selling off assets. One of the assets they sold was a division called Amplify Games. And so the good news is there's life for Amplify Games. They joined with Story Toys, and so I guess I think this is cool because these are extraordinary games, and now they got a second chance. Again, the brand thing comes up. Language learning games are popular across the planet. They have a very high growth rate, and the revenues will triple. Now, these aren't terribly difficult to develop, and they rank consistently in almost all the countries that we track. It's interesting that there are anomalies in the countries. Brain trainers, language learning, and early childhood games generally rank in the top 20 in almost every country in the world. But then you get to places, and I'm not going to mention which ones, that they don't show up. So I'm not, I can speculate again, which I'm not going to do, why that is, but every country is basically different. Now, Rovio, Angry Birds, established a deal with a German language learning company, and for the life of me, I think that word means parrot, but I can't. Papa G, I guess. They launched. This is the value of the brand again. So I guess what I'm advising developers to do is, if they can, to arrange a partnership with a brand. That helps a lot. Now, what's interesting about this product is that it sells for a relatively high price point. It's a subscription model for $8.99 a month, which is pretty high for a mobile language learning app. You know, the vast majority of language learning products on the market are mobile now. There are still desktop web-based language learning products. Very few are game-based per se, and they, the Rosettas of the world still make pretty good money. They're exiting the consumer market, and but the wave now seems to be for the mobile products. And again, the great successes here. Imagine Learning, they were taken off the market. They were acquired by a venture capitalist recently, but they have reached over 1 million downloads of their product. So language learning is a good place to be. All right, here's where we get into the really cool things going on now. Again, I get preachy sometimes, but augmented reality and virtual reality are not the same, although the distinction is getting blurred. In AR, you're basically, digital information is overlaid on the real world. In virtual reality, you're immersed in a simulated environment. I was talking to Darius, who's one of our moderators here today, the other day, about the immersiveness. I have a VR. I have a Samsung phone, and I bought the Samsung Gear device recently, and I was within 5 minutes or so of experiencing virtual reality. I was in tears because it was so beautiful and so different. Unbelievable that we can do this with a $80 headset, and you can get headsets now for $10, $15. So Google, basically, with their cardboard product, which is rebranded now as Daydream, has basically changed the world and has taken VR to the mass market. Almost all the AR products on the market today are mobile. For a while there, augmented reality was used in advertising, and they tried to use it on desktops and stuff, but it wasn't quite the same experience. Now, there's a word called mixed reality, which I don't use much. Actually, I don't use it at all, but because I'm not quite sure what people mean by it. I will say that some people are keen on it. Microsoft, in particular, likes the word mixed reality. Now, until recently, AR and VR has been very difficult and very expensive to build. The barriers to entry right now are fading fast. In the report I wrote for Serious Play, I give a lot more examples of these things. Microsoft's new build, Windows Creator Update, has embedded Windows Holographic in it, and they call it, again, they call it mixed reality. And then they have their HoloLens, which is a very expensive headset, but holographic is embedded in the operating system. In the next, I'm actually dreading that update to see what it does to my machine, but basically the holographic technology is embedded in the operating system now. Daydream is the new version of Cardboard, but Daydream now, prior to Daydream, you had to download an app to play a Cardboard title. Now Google has embedded the VR technology that they call Daydream into their new build, Android build called Nougat. So basically it's on the device. There's about 4, 5, 6 devices now that actually have Nougat. So basically you don't have to download an app now anymore. You just find the app and play it. Now, Google's Tango is an amazing piece of technology. And this is an example, and Microsoft has one of these as well. Google's Tango creates artificial reality in real time. It's extraordinary. In relatively, you know, I just astonished because I started my career as a solid modeler, as a 3D animator in an instructional design department at AT&T, and it would take us weeks and weeks and weeks to just do a few seconds of instructional animation. So, and if you look, Vuforia used to be owned by Qualcomm, now owned by PTC. They integrate directly with Unity. So they claim you can build an AR app in 5 minutes. By the way, I'm tempted to play with some of these things, but I don't have time. All right. Location-based learning has been around for a while. The new iteration of the products, however, are much more sophisticated. The growth rate is very, very high, and the revenues will grow over 6 times by 2022. What I find interesting is these games are not just anchored at physical locations, pardon me, but they're also anchored in time. So a lot of these apps take you either forward in time or backward in time. So there's an app, one of the first titles for the HoloLens, Microsoft's HoloLens, is a title called The Colosseum. And what it is, it's a 3D, totally immersive tour, if you will, of the Colosseum. The Colosseum when it was built 2,000 years ago in Rome. So it's one thing to tour the Colosseum ruins today in Rome, but it's one thing altogether, another thing altogether, to actually walk, climb the stairs, walk around, go in and out of the halls, to tour the Colosseum when it was brand new. The product, I highly recommend this one as well. Look at the demos of this. They also have one for Machu Picchu, and so it's incredible. Location-based learning products, you know, used to be pretty baseline. Basically, you get an audio headset, you know, at the museum or whatever. But now they're become very sophisticated, if you will, smartphone-based, and they're used at a lot of exhibition venues. One of the most common game-based is scavenger hunts, digital and non-digital scavenger hunts for children. Now, this is this graphic's starting to get dated somewhat, but basically you have an anchor, if you will, in location and space and time. And again, the anchor could be in the time part of it, it could be future or past. But basically you have a geofence around you. So basically you have triggers and anchors that when you get close with your smartphone, they'll trigger an event or a game. But I want to talk about the new stuff. First generation location-based services emphasized the position of the object. So they had QR codes, various triggers, markers, beacons, which is a chip, RFID chip. They tagged, if you will, the position of the object. And then when you get close with your smartphone or your device, it triggers the event or the content. The current next generation of location-based learning emphasizes the position of the user via the smartphone sensors. I don't know if everybody's familiar with the movie Minority Report, but while this type of technology is used in venues, exhibition venues, it's used a lot in marketing, in retail environments. Fortunately, you have to opt in on it, but basically they track you as you walk through the grocery store or the shoe store or the whatever, the shopping mall. And so I'm not quite sure how I feel about that, because I always turn off my phone, everything off my phone when I'm in a public venue. But these new types of indoor positioning are becoming increasingly sophisticated. The last bullet I want to talk about here, this is extraordinary. They take an LED and then they embed a chip that flashes a pattern. That pattern is too fast for the human eye to see, but it's just fine for the camera, your camera. So basically, as you walk through the exhibit or the retail environment, an invisible, to you at least, to us, an invisible pulse of light is hitting your camera, hitting your device, which as you get close to that display or you pass something, it delivers that content to your phone. Again, there's some spookiness to that I'm trying to get my arms around. Okay, we're winding down. I want to have some time to do questions. I want to talk about private investment because this is probably important to all the game developers here. We view private investment as a leading indicator, and it's extraordinary right now, the money that's going into all kinds of next generation products, but in particular, games. Now, this is the activity. I'm kind of neurotic, if you will, obsessive. I've been watching, this is what I did, one of the things I did for Microsoft when I was there. I was there for 8 years, and we tracked in private investment to learning technologies. I managed a team, the advanced knowledge engineering team at Microsoft that built the world's first global online learning platform, first commercial online learning platform. So from day one at Microsoft, you had to watch the competition. So we watched venture capital for a very early time. So I've been watching this for a long time, and look at this. Now, some of the patterns are triggered by recessions. 2000, 2008, 2009, those drops are recessionary. But the activity that's happening now is breathtaking. Now, I will caution you that investment activity is inherently unpredictable. And so far in the first quarter of this year, it's been rather slow. So I'm not sure whether we're going to reach the 7 billion, because you cannot use what they call the rear view mirror investment patterns as a predictor for future activity. So investors, all kinds of things can happen, economic problems, socioeconomic issues, new products coming on the market. Game-based companies. Last year, a company called Age of Learning raised an amazing $150 million. This is the highest amount ever obtained by a game-based learning company in the history of the learning technology industry. Now, they very successful. They are consistently ranked in the top 10, if not the top, the very top, in all the app stores in most countries on the planet. And when they got this money, they indicated they had made 100 million in revenues in 2015, which here we'll say is a lot of money. And now they've got this investment capital, and what they're doing is they're moving into the K through 12, which is a very difficult market. The academic market is quite difficult because it requires a great deal of sales and marketing expenses. An Israeli company called Metaari raised 45 million in July. They have mobile math games for children between 5 and 10, and they've got up to 57 million since 2015. Now, Play Kids is a division of a Brazilian company called Mobile, and the division keeps raising money, and they also are consistently ranked. The reason I'm telling you this is these companies are attracting investor activity, and so these are good examples of what investors are interested in now. We're almost done here. I want to take some questions. As you can see, over the last 3 years, investor interest in the legacy products has diminished. In the case of e-learning, on the far left has diminished dramatically. But there's been sharp drops, at least in 2016, for all the legacy products. Now look at the investments on the right for next generation products. Again, you have to take this as a rear view mirror, because it's not necessarily a predictor of how things are going, but that pattern alone, which you're looking at, just the visual pattern, is amazing. At any rate, what it does show is, at least in 2016, investors are keenly interested in next generation products. And look at the game-based learning. That's extraordinary. Brain trainers are still attracting investment. That's the good news. Bad news for developers is they're very sophisticated products based on neuroscience, and so they're more expensive to develop, but the more sophisticated ones are attracting a great deal of capital. Another indicator is the number of startups, game-based startups, educational game-based startups, is increasing every year. So a lot of companies are coming to the market to tap the revenues. There you go. This is basically the money slide. This pattern is so dramatic that it makes me a little nervous, because the dramatic increase in the investments made to game-based learning, and I described this in a lot greater detail in the report, but in a laundry list of the companies that are making this money. So this on the surface looks like really, really good news, but again, I don't know what 2017 will hold. All right.